the Avant Inn. I'm one of your hosts, Jerome Allen.
And I'm another host, Topher Wagner.
And today we are joined by a wonderful and amazing and immaculate guest, Miss Kinsey Klein.
Woo! Thanks so much for having me on the pod. I'm so excited to be here.
The first friend of the pod, the best friend of the pod,
Aw,
the only friend of the pod.
Inaugural
wow.
friend.
Not for long.
But for now, which is what matters.
It's kind of like the first day of school, you know, your first friend.
Yeah, it's like going back to college and like your friends, your first 2 weeks are totally different than the people that you're actually friends with years down the line.
I definitely use the tactic of like, you're my best friend. We talk about Harry Potter. We have so much in common.
And then you realize sophomore year, like, I don't like any of those people. I was forced into that circumstance.
I don't even remember their names or their faces, so they're just ghosts to me now.
So Kinsey, you come on the cast to talk about some things. What would you like to share with the listeners?
So I recently got off social media and it's been a great experience. As such, I've been really interested in a lot of works about just data ethics, some pieces, documentaries about the harm of social media. And I came across a really interesting work known as the Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. And I listened to a whole podcast about it on A Time of Monsters, which is another really great cast. And as I was listening to it, I thought it was a book that had been written in the past 5 years, but I was really stunned to learn that it was actually written in 1967, I believe. And he really presented a very prescient view of society. And Guy Debord wrote it in response to a society that he believed was organized around consumption, which induced boredom and shaped people's desires in ways that could only be filled through the purchase of consumer goods. He had a lot to say about consumerism, obviously, post-war capitalism, art, celebrities, idolization of politicians, and he crafts this lens and this critique through almost like non-intelligent being, which he calls the spectacle. And I just thought it would be really interesting to talk to a couple of friends about it and, just see what they thought and, share some insights about the spectacle with the world.
Yeah. Do you remember that Rick and Morty episode where there was Rick had dated the what was it, like the planet Unity? Yeah, this is
the hive mind.
This is what that made me think of.
Yes.
That we're all sort of not controlled, but like in witness of this one thing, like connected. It's like a path between us all.
I think that's a really great analogy in some ways. Like I've kind of been drawing upon this idea of it being like a fungus in that it has a clear directive, which is to continue growing for the sake of growth at all costs. But like, it doesn't have like an intelligent motive. I mean, it is something that exists within the framework of capitalism. So it exists within those politics, yet it's not something that can be controlled by like a CEO somewhere. Like it's not a shadowy room of people controlling the spectacle. It's kind of like its own autonomous thing that's just growing and developing. So I think Unity is actually a pretty good way of looking at it.
I would say the only difference being is that like we're not everyone is conscious of the spectacle happening. It's just sort of like constantly reinforcing itself and justifying itself in a way that at least for me, when I was reading the book, I was like, why have I not been questioning this all along? At least Unity, like, she knew who she was. Or they.
She did. She was very confident. She knew exactly what she was about. She was unashamed. She wasn't going to lie about it. And she maybe even had a more noble directive. I mean, at least she was stopping race wars, so
True.
can't hate on that.
So I think one question I had also for the both of you is like, what? So I use that analogy, but what does a spectacle mean? What's the definition you could give it?
So I think this spectacle, in the most simple term possible, is an invisible force that exists to reinforce the hegemonic structure of global capitalism. And when you get into it, a little bit more granularly, like, okay, what the heck does that mean? In particular, it's a system that relies upon a never-ending supply of commodifiable images. And it really it encourages us to focus on appearance over all other things. And it's not that the spectacle is like a collection of images that you can find somewhere. It's more that it's a social relation among all people everywhere that is mediated by images, and it exists to distract and pacify mass groups of people. Yet again, like, it's not something that's coming from the top down. It's something that we all participate and that we are all reinforcing to one extent or another. And a big something that Debord posits is that our previous economy, many, many years prior, was about being a person, having a trade, just being an individual, and it devolved from being to having. And you could show off your status in society by having certain things, be it like a house or the latest fancy refinements and clothings. But it was his theory that it was shifting once again from an economy of having to an economy of appearances. So it became less about having said things and the appearance of having said things, which I think is just, I mean, it's freaky. It's really prescient. Like, that's a very, I mean, like, not that you even need quantifiable data to talk about it. Like, we all live in a society. We all know that people are absolutely obsessed with appearances, sometimes to a really scary and detrimental effect. So hopefully that kind of answers a bit what it is. Like, it's not the mass media, it's not movies, it's not Instagram, it's not this or that or the other. It's all these things working in conjunction together that are in part mediated by you, by me, by grandma. Like, everyone is a part of the spectacle. I wanted to ask, like, what were some of your reactions as you were reading the book? Like, what were some of the things that came to mind as you were going along?
My initial thought was that Guy Debord was very like prophetic of like the circumstances we're in now. Like, how could he have known how severe this sort of like commodification of appearances and stuff would be? But I don't think he really was predicting anything, as much as like social media and all that is just an extension of where we were at 50 years ago. Like the capitalism has kind of been doing the same notions. Social media just gives us access to commodify ourselves in a way that is just like so too accessible. It's one thing to be like, I want to wear this coat so that I can go to a party and show off my coat. And then there's the other person who could say like, I'm going to get this just so I can take a photo and put it on Instagram. And that's going to be like my social currency out of this. And so, yeah, I guess my idea sort of shifted throughout reading it. Like, I guess he didn't really predict the future as much as he did just define where we've been for the entire past half century.
I think I applied the lens of social media to it at the beginning, but then I sort of removed that lens and started seeing it more as like a way to talk about labor and a way to talk about products. And then it just threw me in this loop of like, every product I look at is removed way from like where the materials come from. It makes me like, I feel like the distraction or the separation from people and what they produce is what really fucked me up in terms of what they said. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting point to be made is that a lot of people with office jobs like can't even tell you exactly what it is that they produce or how, like, quite exactly how they're productive to the economy. And I mean, like, it's my belief that if all the ad agencies in the world shut down tomorrow, like nothing would fundamentally change. Like, the wheels would keep spinning, right? Like, but Topher, I was really interested in something you said about how we are now able to commodify ourselves on social media and how we are choosing to present ourselves as commodities for both our friends, our families, like just random people out there, and, potentially brands. Like, it is a goal of many people to portray themselves as a product so that they can make money, like partnering with brands, which I think is really fascinating. And I'm not hating. You got to get your coins somehow, but I do think that there is a concern when we begin to switch the lens of viewing ourselves as living beings into the lens of I am a product. And I actually just saw a new app. It's not new, it's been around for a while, but it's gaining some press coverage right now. It's called Nunu. And you are like, the premise of Nunu is that you're an influencer and people can vote upon your actions from things like, where do I go today? Like, do I date this person? Do I date that person? And I mean,
Whoa.
I think there's an argument to be made from people who are probably less concerned about this type of thing that, oh, you're consenting to this. It's you putting it out there. You don't have to do anything that you're not comfortable with. And like, while that's true to a certain extent, like, you're going to be getting followers and engagement for the more high risk behaviors and the more outrageous behaviors that you choose to engage with. And for developing minds, especially, like, I think that's really problematic. Yeah, sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think the people as commodities thing is really fascinating. And I read a lot of the Society of the Spectacle 2.0, which is a collection of essays that was printed in 2017. It was really great. And one of the essays was entirely about the position that posting on social media is entirely unpaid labor, which was really, really fascinating because you're just putting out a pool of data for, Instagram, Facebook, whoever, but also for all the brands and companies that are buying data. Like, you are essentially just feeding them extremely valuable information.
You don't even have to post for you to be doing the unpaid labor. Just you clicking likes on things, just you. Because there's the person who consumes the social media but doesn't actively post. And then there's the influencer who is posting and, commodifying themselves or whatever brand. And all of them are still consumers in the eyes of the brands of the, whatever the capitalist structure is.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if you're on social media, even if you're not on social media, you're participating in the spectacle. But it's just it's kind of mind blowing to think about, like, liking a celebrity's post, that's participating in the spectacle, that's data. Like, that's going to be the performance of that post is going to be used to like manufacture additional posts, like what performs well, what doesn't. Like, that's how we have to prop you up as an idol. So
I feel like this is just to kind of go against and provide some variety. I feel like this can conflate a little with like large scale spectacle versus like independent artists. Cause I think the influencer economy is not just one singular Nike looking at all of our likes, but isn't there a case for individual people who are artists who utilize Instagram for Patreon or OnlyFans, whatever it may be, and then that provides funding for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I think it's important to recognize as well as we, delve into this conversation that Guy Debord did not think technology was a bad thing inherently. and he did not think that products were bad. Like, he's not saying that we need to live in white flats and only eat like one brand of beans for the rest of our lives. Like,
Mhm.
that's not like what he was positing. And I think that if he were alive today, he'd be terrified. But I think he would also be encouraged to see things like that, where people are able to reach out truly to their communities and to, build up a network of support, especially through efforts like crowdfunding with Patreon and OnlyFans and, other avenues as well. Like, I think it is important to recognize that, like, not all spectacular events are created equal. And, a person out there, like, making their coin, like, I'm not here to criticize them. Like, we all have to make a living, and things like Patreon and OnlyFans have really opened up a lot of avenues for people that they didn't previously have. So, yeah.
There's this thing, it's called waifu in the anime community,
Oh,
where
sure.
you there's like a virtual avatar that you throw money at and it'll do whatever you want it to do. So when you were talking about like this influencer choice influenced by people watching, made me think of that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like, there are virtual influencers now. One of them, I think her name's Lil Michaela, like, she came out as a sexual assault survivor. And it's like, girl, you're not real. You're not real.
The virtual
the VTuber character
Yes.
came out.
Yeah, she
Whoa.
said she'd survived a sexual assault. And I mean, like, it's just as Debord would say, it's a spectacular inversion of reality. I mean, I find it, I personally find it extremely offensive. Like, this, you're taking like the pain of real people and like pumping it out to get engagement and to make money off of it. Like, it's not because you felt this needed to be seen. It's not because you needed to share a story. Like, it's completely fictitious for the purpose ultimately of just making money and inflating your ego and seeing how far you can take this project.
I think the tooling of the spectacle for like likes, or what you just said made me think of like the YouTube apology video. Like, there's these specific things you use just to get people to look at you.
You gotta cry in a YouTube apology video, and also you gotta do your best to not actually apologize.
I'm sorry that you feel that way.
Well, what do you guys think about like utilizing the tools of the spectacle, like in order to try to serve something that you see as just? Like, I think you see a lot of examples of like pride parades and rallies becoming like overly commodified and like very capitalist, or even seeing like BLM imagery appearing in the Super Bowl commercials and stuff. And it's like the spectacle is occasionally caught using itself for good, but at the end of the day, isn't there also an idea in the book like recuperation, where you take like radical ideas and thoughts and you just repackage them and reform them into the socially acceptable thing, to the point at which your original idea is no longer even present at all? So I guess I'm just asking if you think there is like a middle ground where the spectacle can serve something meaningful.
I mean, that's a really great question. I mean, you're right on the nose. Like, it is recuperation, and the spectacle will subsume everything in its path. Like, that's kind of what it does. I mean, I think to a certain extent, like, you can't argue that it's good that LGBTQA people are being more and more accepted into, spaces where they were traditionally denied any rite of passage, or like, corporate spaces. Like, it's really great that you can be gay or trans and, have a successful career. But I think it's also important to remember that, like, especially in our current moment, like, that is all just language. And a lot of these same companies, like, I know Pfizer is a really great example, actually. They're very, very welcoming and inclusive of gay and trans people in their workforce, and they donate millions and millions of dollars a year to anti-gay organizations and to Republican organizations. I mean, like, yeah, you're using this language, but you're also trying to insert yourself into a space that you now see is commodifiable. They're like, oh, like gay people spend money and like they're generating wealth now. Like we have to get in there. Um, but I do it I'm not really sure that it can ever be used positively because at the end of the day, it's like, all right, I'm not I think the tides were turning, especially around LGBTQ issues, long before the spectacle got involved. Like, I really do believe that is a matter of like societal norms shifting and like people having conversations with one another, like, and really getting to know people in their lives who are either gay or trans or like friends with those kinds of people. Like, I don't think most people kind of turned the tide because they saw like I don't know, like a corporate pride thing in a float. Like once you get to that point, like that messaging isn't really for like cis straight people. It's for people who are within that community, like so they can endear themselves to it. Is it okay if I switch gears for a second? Like it's still
Absolutely.
related, but kind of different. So like
Whatever you want.
Guy Debord talks about this idea of detournement, which is essentially
Sorry.
Yeah, it's like political art that is raising awareness of the spectacle by using like a shared societal historical context to critique it. So, I mean, I think a great example of this is like a lot of Banksy's work, like very, very critical. I mean, like he had that painting that just destroyed itself to like try and decrease its value at an auction, and like that just made it more valuable. But like, I think he's a person who's like attempting to do those kinds of things. Like the Situation Internationale movement that Debord was part of would like do all of these like stunts, and he like they encouraged people to go for random walks throughout their neighborhood, which like doesn't really sound radical, but it kind of is. Like, when was the last time you went for a walk without a destination in mind? But my favorite example of the spectacle subsuming something, so the reason I bring up the movement Situationist Internationale is because it inspired a lot of really, really fascinating cultural movements. Like it inspired culture jamming, it inspired a lot of the punk scene, it inspired the Merry Pranksters who were like the gang around Ken Kesey in San Francisco. And Ken Kesey like did all the acid tests, and he also wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I always confuse that with A Clockwork Orange. But
Yeah.
like out of that came the Cacophony Society, and out of that came motherfucking Burning Man. So like, I mean, there's like a fascinating cultural through line, and Burning Man was like an insane like libertarian experiment, and like you couldn't buy anything there, and like it like one of the main tenets of the rules, quote rules, it's like the core philosophies that you have to follow is decommodification. And for many, many years, you could not buy a goddamn thing at Burning Man. And now you can buy ice and you can buy coffee. And like, there's just an incredible ethos of like this really radical political art that is like really, really anti-spectacle. But like, if you go to Burning Man or look at reporting around Burning Man, like it is the definition of the spectacle. Like, I mean, and so many insanely rich people go there. So many people are trying to figure out ways that they can commodify Burning Man. And it's been pretty difficult for people to do it so far because the org is like not having any of it. But it's amazing. Like it was this extremely radical anti-establishment thing that like people thought was really fucking weird and didn't want to be associated with at all. And now like the most famous, wealthy, influential people in the world are like trying really, really hard to go. And like it's based on a lottery. Like, yeah, money helps to a certain extent, but like it's not like anyone can just get in there. It's like it's a huge status thing. It's really, really, really fascinating.
Wow. So it's interesting that you bring up that you almost have to have a pay to play in order to pay to get out of the system or to avoid the spectacle only to re-enter.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Whoa.
That's a great point. And like I love regional burns because they are still really radical and anti-establishment. Like you can go, I mean, you'll meet all sorts of folks there and you'll meet Republicans and like Blue Lives Matter people, but like you'll also meet like at a regional burn someone that's a cashier for a living. Like
Mm.
they're a lot more open to like working class folks because they're so much less expensive and like
Mm.
the art is just so much more participatory. Like you're not a spectator when you go to a regional burn, like you're always participating in something. A big premise that Debord had, he was like, art's worthless now, none of it's good. And I disagree. I think there's still great art, but I do think he brings up a really important component, which is that like so much of what the spectacle does to us is beats out any sort of like comprehensive understanding of history in the world around us. Like so much of art, if you go to a museum, and like this is true for myself as well, is just walking around and thinking, wow, what a beautiful picture. Wow, that's so pretty. Like you don't know anything about the artist, you don't know anything about like the cultural or political or socioeconomic, you know, context to the piece. Like it's divorced from all of that. And like to a certain extent that's intentional. Like as I was doing research for this, I was like, what's like a good example of like I guess just history that we don't understand? And I mean, there's an obvious one, which I feel like, Jerome, you're probably going to know the answer to this. But the question is, how many coups d'etats, how many successful coups d'etats at the local or national level, local, national, or state level have we had in the United States?
My guess is null.
I would guess none.
We've had one successful coup d'etat in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah, the Wilmington
yes.
race
Yeah,
riots.
the race riot.
Yep. And like, I mean, I know that because I grew up in Wilmington and I had a really great AP Lit teacher, but like, if you surveyed Americans, like no one would know that. If you surveyed people in North Carolina or Wilmington, they wouldn't know that. And it's like, how does not every single American know about the one coup d'etat in our country's history? Like, that's so crazy. Like, we are really, really divorced from historical context because the spectacle does not want us to think that things have ever been different or that things could ever change. Like, it wants everything to run the exact same way forever.
Well, then there's the overlap or the hijacking of white supremacist structures that utilize the spectacle. Because I was even, when you were speaking, I was thinking about music and how rock and roll has been so divorced from like black female guitar players, and how it's become a white boys club at some point, and now that's slowly changing, but still
That's a
by
great
design,
point.
like you said.
Yeah, no one knows Sister Rosetta. What's up with that?
I was just gonna say, Jerome, to your point, like that's also extremely true of underground music. Like underground music within like the dance scene, all pioneered by really creative, fantastic people of color. And like it's very rare that you like go to a club or that you go to a really huge festival lineup and like the main stage is a person of color performing.
Yeah.
But like we wouldn't even have this genre without people of color. It's insane.
Yeah.
You were talking about like the political movements that the Situationist movement sort of like spurred up in Paris. Because I was reading in about like May 1968 in Paris and like all the cultural changes that came from that. And the people say that like that movement was culturally successful, but politically really didn't do anything. So now we're just living in the society where we can be aware of all these flaws of what's going on. We're aware that people lack the historical context. We know that the art industry is like mostly bullshit, but yet we haven't actually made any strides to change the political structure because, you know, like we said, the political structure just allows us to feel this way and makes us feel like we're doing something by, you know, expressing that. But it's not really giving us any of the tools to actually change these things. Or maybe that's too pessimistic, but
I think a great parallel is when you try to bring up a problem with management at work and they will always promise to hear you. But they will never, ever, ever change a goddamn thing.
Retweet.
like unless there's like, just no, unless there's purchase for it, or like it's really, really small, or unless it's like a process related thing. But if it's a systemic issue, like you got to band together. And it is pessimistic, but like I do think it's not as if there's like no hope, right? Like his solution to this was forming workers' councils. So he was, saying like we gotta unionize, we gotta get the forces together.
Right.
And I think like any time where there is collective action, like be it a union or a mutual aid group or anything of the sort, like you are more likely to achieve political change. And I think there's been like um a renaissance of grassroots movement within the US political system. And like, I'm not feeling the most optimistic about, our current situation, just given like where we are today, how the Democratic primary played out, like just seeing like some of the stuff the Biden admin is working on right now. Like, I'm definitely not feeling super duper optimistic. But this stuff also really does take time. I think something is starting to work when you're getting resistance to it. Like if you're talking about all these things and that's fine, and you're even getting encouragement for having this discourse, like that may be a sign that you need to push it further.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that a lot of the protests last year, learning about them came through social media networks, is a sense of not hijacking, but utilizing the spectacle for collective action.
So I do think like social media can absolutely be a force for good, but I do not think that we have control over that unless there's an option without a profit incentive. And it's really, really hard to imagine an option like that because, like, people like have to get paid for their labor. I mean, like, I guess you could nationalize Facebook, but like, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg would like literally go down kicking and screaming. Like, I don't, and that's like, even like trying to describe something like this is really difficult. It's like the spectacle trying to make it impossible to imagine a better future, or imagine a future where things could be different, where things could not be tied to a profit incentive for the extremely basic task of communicating with our networks. Like we're conditioned to think that like there has to be a profit incentive for us to talk to our friends and family. Like what is that?
There is a huge conflation there. That's so true.
Right, because even like any collective action you try to do on social media, any community you try to build up, like you're really just striving for it to become big enough that the media will pay any attention to it, right? Like you have to prove that you have a strong enough collectivism that they can profit off of it. So even on the lowest level, you're always just striving for the spectacle to take you seriously or to engage in it at all.
And I think to underline just the use of the language "pay attention" also has that exchange embedded in the way that we're talking about language of the spectacle.
Yeah. Or I was thinking the term influencer as well is like very on the nose, how like you're actively trying to control the social order. Like you are actively trying to achieve a level of recognition that you can then control what people purchase and what ideas they, strive for. And that's kind of a scary concept.
The spectacle is seemingly everywhere, but is there healthy ways to engage and healthy ways to resist as well?
I mean, I think, yeah, like, I think having an awareness, like, really having an awareness of it, I think is helpful because for so much of my life, I would just watch things and, like, just accept it as new, true information. And, like, that's not a healthy way to engage with the world around you. Like, I used to be very, very confused about why the world worked in certain ways. And, like, I mean, I think it's kind of depressing to be a leftist sometimes, but I also think it's given me like a ground to stand on and to be able to understand like some of the motivations for why things happen the way they do, and to just have like a really consistent ideological worldview. Like, we can debate whether or not you agree, but like, I think it's been immensely helpful for me to have all of these lenses through which to view the world. And I mean, there's that great, it's either, I want to say it's Reductress article where it's like woman takes 30-minute break from being a feminist to enjoy television. Like I don't think we can suggest, like, you can't just retreat from life. Like, that would be the only way to escape the spectacle. And I think having a critical eye for some of those things, like, is a quote, like, healthy way to engage with it. I mean, I think ideally you want to you want to try to engage with less spectacular pieces of media and try to engage with spectacular things for like as little time as possible. Like, really take social media breaks. The most amazing, like spectacular ways that this has played out is with the proliferation of QAnon. Like, I'm really, really concerned about QAnon as a conspiracy network for the future. It's a spectacular inversion of reality that many, many people have bought into. And you can say, like, yes, you get to choose your own information online, but like to a certain extent, you don't. To a certain extent, it's about who's in your network, and you can't always control that. And it's just about like the fringe things that you see and like start to interact with. And I mean, like, if you spend time looking at a QAnon post because you're like, what the fuck? This shit's crazy. And you're like trying to read it or whatever, the social media app can tell you're engaging with it and it'll keep sending you more. So like you might think it's crazy fucking bullshit and then just get pulled in because the app wants you to stay on it longer. And I think like one of the ways we can tell that QAnon is a problem beyond like, you know, these crazy like boomer MAGA people is that 18% of Democrats think that QAnon claims are somewhat or very accurate.
Whoa.
Yikes.
Gen Z believes in QAnon. Like, there are Gen Zers out there who like believe in QAnon, believe in Pizzagate. I read a great article about this. So one of my favorites was that they don't believe Wyoming is real.
Wow.
Like, and I guess that particular kid's evidence was like, have you ever met someone from Wyoming? Which, fair point.
Poor people under 30 living in Wyoming.
Come to mention it.
I do like what you say about the algorithm, though, about how like you could be, because that's happened to me several times where I'll watch like a terrible YouTube, I'll watch a Ben Shapiro video and just to either hate it or to, you know, formulate arguments against it. And then all of a sudden your algorithm gets flooded with this. And I think even my brother told me like he got sort of like radicalized down this right-wing path just from YouTube algorithms. And he had to find a different algorithm to start like brainwashing him back to his original beliefs. And
yeah, it's crazy. And like a lot of it really is like at least a little bit out of our control. Like, it's really easy to blame people for having bad opinions. And I think in some ways that is a lot more merited. Like, if you're racist, come the fuck on. Like, it's 2021. Like, you just gotta get off. You just got to get off that bullshit. But like in terms of like information campaigns, especially, like those can be very, very pernicious. And I think like the final argument, it's that if we want to have any kind of productive political conversation, if we want to change the world in a way that works for all of us, we need to have a shared understanding of the world we inhabit. And more specifically, like we need to have a shared understanding of the problems that we face. And if you are a freaking Democrat that believes in QAnon, like, you think our problem is that there's like a global elite cabal of pedophiles who are like marketing kids on the black market for adrenochrome. And like, of course, child trafficking is a very serious issue. And of course it does exist. But like, I mean, when we're talking about like the problems that we can be working on a day-to-day basis, like if that's your primary concern and if that's what you're flooding your information channels with, like it divides us in a way that's beyond Republican and Democrat. Like a lot of Republicans want Medicare for all, but if your reality is so inverted and so spectacular that like you're not even thinking about the problems that you face in your day-to-day life, that poses an enormous problem for your future as an individual and for our collective future as a society.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Kenzie.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been super fun to talk about this and like nerd out on all this stuff with you. But yeah, if people are interested in this work but don't want to read something philosophical, I would again suggest Tom Nicholas and his YouTube series, or just like checking out culture jamming. There's a lot of really cool, interesting stuff you can pick up on from that.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening and tuning in to the Avant Inn. You can like and subscribe at the button below, or leave us a comment on Apple reviews, and tell your friend. Our new theme song is by Nox Engler, and it is the Avant Inn theme song.
Kenzie, do you have an inspiring quote that you've heard?
Take our listeners out, our
An
viewers too.
inspiring quote that I've heard. It is a quote by a reenacted version of Truman Capote in Infamous. I don't know if he actually said this, but I think it would be in line with his beliefs. And it's, as artists, we have the power to change this world and create a better one.
Bye-bye.